Rand Fishkin is an icon in the SEO space, coaching mortals like me for decades through the noisy jungle of internet search traffic. He's a master of how to be found. Imagine my feeling of worlds colliding when I found out that Rand Fishkin is starting a game studio, and he's making an indie game called Snackbar at the End of the World. In order to fund his new studio, he sought investment from his personal network, and he decided to open source his documents and his methods so anyone else can copy them. I encourage you to check that out in the description where all the particulars will be, but it's designed to be adaptable no matter what your situation is, whether your friends are millionaires or if you're just asking friends and family for a few farthings. So we'll talk about the reaction that got from indies as well as Rand's experiences while seeking investment. We'll talk about his new game, and now that gaming is its own noisy jungle, we'll talk about the problem of search and how to be found. What is Snackbar Studio? What are your aims for it? What are your dreams for it? What is it setting out to do?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's something that's evolved over time. When I initially started, but my wife and I initially started with this idea of, hey, let's make an indie video game. It was during COVID lockdowns. We were, kind of trapped inside and playing a lot of games, and kept thinking to ourselves, gosh, this is it's really fun and enjoyable. It's sort of a wonderful medium and a creative artistic expression. And also it fits quite seamlessly between our two worlds. So Geraldine is a food writer. Her latest book, If You Can't Take the Heat, was a bestseller. She, a few years before that, won a James Beard Award for an essay that she wrote, and she's sort of a very well followed person in food and writing circles. And my world has always been software development. As for how that evolved, well, we're now in this place where my previous company, while we were in development of this game, my previous company sold. I had nothing to do with it. I was not involved anymore, but Geraldine and I were still big shareholders. I said, the budget for the game's going way up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the game, you take the role of a chef in 1960s Italy. Every day as the chef, you go out into the magical wilds around your hilltop town, and you forage for ingredients that you will use in your restaurant. You learn recipes and build relationships with people in the town and earn lira, the old Italian currency. And thanks to the magic of magic, you don't have to kill any animals. The game is technically vegetarian. So when you defeat a boar out in the wilds, the magical energy of the boar leaves a little pancetta or guanciale, or a pork loin for you. And the piglet, runs off into the forest happily. Yeah.
So it sounds like it has a combat system, but you're not exactly killing the boar for meat. You just kind of defeat him and he goes, all right,
you
have
win.
some bacon.
Yeah. Here's some bacon. Exactly. Go make your spaghetti alla carbonara.
Amazing. Playing games in COVID, was that sort of a new discovery of games for you, or had you always been a gaming fan and you sort of, just had the time to get back into it?
I grew up using games, I think, as a retreat from a challenging family environment. Games were like this refuge for me, right? Where I could, escape into those worlds and be, sort of fulfilled in a different way. But gosh, I doubt I got 30 or 40 hours of gaming in a year for most of my adult life until COVID.
Do you think those experiences informed some of the elements that you wanted to tackle in Snackbar at the End of the World? Some of the more political relationship building elements that you mentioned?
This is odd to say. I'm not an artist, but with a video game, you are investing so much time and energy. You're putting so much of yourself into a character and experience, at least in a narrative-driven game, that I think you can't help but take away some of the morality. I remember during COVID, I played quite a bit of Disco Elysium, which quickly became one of my favorite games of all time. And the fan commentary, Reddit is a great place for this, right? Where you can read about and see what people think of characters. One of my favorites is the ACAB, except this one NPC who appears in Disco Elysium, who's a cop.
A cab except me.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to imagine that you can potentially open their eyes to an experience that they haven't had personally, but that helps them relate to other people in the world around them, other situations in the world around them. I think that weirdly, a lot of my own personal ethics and life focus comes from early video games that I played as a kid.
That's where I learned to cut the grass and find all the gems. If I see a pot, I have to break it.
I mean,
Zelda told me so.
Who made that ceramic, and why will it be back in this room 5 minutes after I destroy it?
That's right. Yeah, it'll be back in 5 minutes. Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah. I agree so much about how the design of a game reveals the sort of principles of the designer, and I often find that happens in the little ways. Just these little decisions that they make, and you can find tons of examples online of little mistakes. So you have people not putting in the effort that they probably should have. Like I think there was a shooting game in the Middle East that used the wrong language for the region that they were in on the signs. Little things like that. It's often not the overbearing story elements. It's often just these little things. And I'd love to get what you and Geraldine, what your approach is to walking that line, because I find it can be really difficult when you set out with a goal, especially when your goal involves social change, to not be too overbearing.
Oh yeah.
Not be too on the nose. You want to walk the line between being subtle enough, but also having, making a point. What's your approach to that?
Yeah, I think this is something we've discussed in detail, where you can't hammer people over the head. I don't care if it's a book, a TV show, a movie, a video game. You can't hammer people over the head with this is sort of right and good, and this is wrong and evil, and we're going to make it really obvious, because the world doesn't work that way either, right? When you meet people with whom you disagree, you often find common ground. You might be friends with them for years before you find out that you disagree on these fundamental issues. They might be family members, neighbors, people you work with, right? And shades of gray is always there. There are people I strongly disagree with on every political, view imaginable. And also, I have seen some of those people, in a hurricane, rush to their neighbor's house and bail them out and help them and give them money and help them, go through government bureaucratic processes that they disagree with in order to, get the FEMA funding. So I don't know. People are complicated, right? And I think that when you make a great piece of art, especially one that's meant to be based in our world, right? Our game setting is not, fantasy land. It's not science fiction world. It is 1960s Italy, which was this time of, revolutionary change in Italy and in Europe. It's a sort of post-fascist, post-economic miracle era, but also with the rise of some of the complicated politics that Italy and Europe experience now, right? We saw the first sort of post-World War II waves of immigration and anti-immigration sentiment during that time. And certainly, I think our obligation is to represent and reflect a close to accurate world, right? Our world has magic. Our world is obviously fictional. But if we can represent many of the feelings and emotions and sentiment experiences that people really had and really have today, and then let players make their choices about how they want to engage with that, that's a much more honest way of letting the game happen. And also, let's be real, Jeremy, if the combat isn't really fun, if it's not really fun to go sneak around and fight a boar and, fend off these magical beasts and watch out for garlic that's going to pop up out of the ground and, chase a leak into a river. If that stuff is not deeply, deeply fun, repeatably fun, like, oh man, I just want to do it again and get better at it and make my weapon better, get my character better, and improve my armor, make more lira at the restaurant, perfect my spaghetti. You know what? If those things aren't fun, none of the storyline will ever matter. right? No one will play and engage with it enough. And so that core fun has got to be there before the narrative gets a chance to shine. And I think, that's the sort of priority for us.
Yeah. And it sounds like your approach is a bit more narrative focused. Like, it sounds like you've got a bit of a loop where there's a combat and there's some story and some crafting elements, and as opposed to being like a systems games like SimCity, because like
Right.
SimCity, I would say like it's a different kind of getting a point across. Like a lot of people quote SimCity as that's where I learned about zoning, residential versus industrial, and but this is more of a combat to narrative game loop.
Yeah, I think whenever we're driving on the highway with friends and they're like, "Oh, they need to add more lanes to this highway."
Yeah.
I'm always like, SimCity teaches us the more lanes you have, the more drivers will just fill those lanes up. It doesn't.
That's right.
It doesn't solve any of your traffic problems.
There's a term for that, isn't it? It's like the traffic equivalent of Parkinson's law, I think, where like, the more time you have, you just fill the time, but the more lanes you have, you just fill the lanes.
Yeah, exactly. SimCity is weirdly, I think it's a deeply liberal game, right? Because it teaches you that sort of all the design decisions that you make as kind of the government of the, city have these huge knock-on impacts on every part of, every life.
Interesting. I never considered it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if it was intentional, but, if you're a policymaker and you're thinking about anything from a SimCity perspective, right? The conservative viewpoint would be like government hands off. But if you hands off in SimCity, it's all over, people. Right?
Yeah.
That's not going to go well for you.
You heard it here first. Will Wright was making a strong political statement.
I mean, look, I think that weirdly, at least in the American political system, Jeremy, the left voters are often quite conservative when it comes to their city planning and zoning issues,
like NIMBY sort of.
Yeah, Nimbyism, right? That is definitely a deep leftist problem, and it has, I think obviously there's kind of a far left in the U.S. that's against it, but that has created many of the challenges that places like California and my hometown of Seattle have experienced the last 20 years. Anyway,
I think
blah politics.
Yeah.
But yes, our game is less, I would say, simulation and more narratively driven with this sort of, I don't even want to call it roguelike. Maybe they call it roguelite loop.
Sure, yeah.
Right, where you're going out into the wilds, and those biomes will evolve. Right, you'll be able to make progress further and further. So it has a loop that's kind of halfway between Hades and Stardew Valley, maybe.
I'm keen to check it out. Do you have a time frame for when you're looking at a release or an early access or something like that?
Yeah, early access. The goal is about somewhere between 18 and 24 months from now.
I definitely feel what you said about, even when you've had a bit of a financial success, when you're then funding a game studio for years, all of a sudden that pile of money doesn't look so big. I'm consulting for a studio at the moment. Mm-hmm. And so they've been funding a full-time staff to just bankrolling it, to create their next game, which now they're in a situation where they didn't think about marketing until the absolute last minute.
No.
And so,
come on.
I'm keen to just hear about what your process was like when you were looking for investment for this new project. And also why you think the reaction was so mixed on Reddit.
I mean, the second question is, it's Reddit.
That's true.
I didn't find that there was not a lot of criticism that was anything other than, this doesn't apply to me because you have had previous financial and business success, which is a completely fair criticism, right? And it's something that I opened with in the, both in the document and in the blog post. I think they just said it snarkier and got more upvotes for it, which is fine. Yeah. You know what? F the rich. Honestly, most people in this, financial bracket are awful. So I completely get Reddit's sentiment around that, and why those would be upvoted things. And I have no problem with it. What I'm more interested in directly is all the sort of comments in the threads below that where people are saying things like, oh, this actually might be helpful for me. Can I do it this way? What about LLC versus C Corp? What if I only want to raise this amount? What are the accredited, investor rules around all those kinds of things? I love seeing that because it suggested to me there's lots of sophisticated folks who are in the game dev subreddit who have these types of questions, who might not have the, sort of experience and business savvy that I've lucked into over the last 20 years. And I have been loving helping those folks. A bunch of them reached, Jeremy, actually one of my favorite little tidbits. There was someone who left a particularly mean comment, really kind of, if my skin wasn't thick from 15 years of online forum discussion, it would have been quite hurtful. And then that same person, private messaged me on Reddit and asked if I would help with their, the pitch deck for their game studio. And I was like, really? You know what? I'm not sure if this is real. I don't know if there's a honeypot, but I would be thrilled to help. Here's my email, drop me a line, whatever. And they took down their mean comment. It was so nice. Yeah. So, I think that, part of the rules of engagement around this stuff is be kind, assume best intent, have some empathy with where people are coming from. A lot of these folks are probably not making very much money and they're trying to, on the side, make a game. And so they see someone who comes in who built a company and sold it and made a bunch of money and now raised a bunch of money for their game studio. And it just feels insulting or frustrating. So I have lots of empathy for that. I don't want to rain on anybody, for their comments there. We also were in that situation where we wanted to socialize some of the risk and also the reward. So I'll say that we obviously contributed to this funding round. We were less than half of it, but we were, a good portion of the funding round, the 2.15 ourselves. And then 39 other investors came in, put in, check amounts between, $25,000 and $100,000, each. And that allowed us to get to an amount that, gives us room to do two things. One, make this game, but also have enough left at the end of that process to, if the game does medium well, but sort of not quite well enough, we can invest in DLC. We have enough time. We have a couple of years of runway to be able to fix and polish the game from between early access and a full release. We could, if we so chose, throw in the towel on the game completely and build another one. It'd have to be a moderately small budget game. But our goal was to build something that gave us some room to make some mistakes. And I think that's a luxury many, many studios don't have, but gosh, if you can possibly get it, what a wonderful thing. Yeah.
And one of the keys, one of the things that you, mentioned there, and I think it was mentioned in the Reddit thread as well, was how you can adapt this process to, whatever situation an indie might be in, whether, if you don't have, like a big network of people with $100,000 to, that's disposable, you can still adapt this method to, your local friend group and local family group and, school, alumni and, part of it is just the indie devs feel like marketing is icky. So what we're talking about represents, yeah.
Oh, come on.
I know. But this is it's something I've come across time and time again. The studio that I mentioned before that left marketing to the last minute is a very common story. And it's because, the developer who I'm talking about will openly say it's because we felt like marketing was icky. And, when we're talking about introverts, which I suspect that game dev has a few, this represents a lot of conversations that, they don't want to have. And, shout out to the introverts. I'm one. I'm very much, hey, recharge my energy in a different way. But, I feel it in me too. It's like when we're talking about these types of conversations, I have to gear myself up to do that. I have to hype myself up to have that kind of conversation, where, I'm asking a close friend for even just if you were to say, let's go ask a friend for $5,000 investment.
Oh my God.
That would be a scary conversation for me.
No, Jeremy, I can tell you that for a full year before I started sending those emails, I was dreading it, absolutely dreading it. It was like this, it's the worst thing in the world. I told Geraldine, I never want to have to raise money again. Like, I hope this is the absolute last time in my life that I ever have to ask anybody to participate. It's weird because let's say the game does well, even moderately well, right? Like, it gets its investors their money back, maybe gets them a little more than that. Even at that point, I will be so thrilled that I asked those people to join in this adventure with us. I don't think there's much else that's more fun and rewarding and exciting than being like, hey, I gave my buddy, 25 grand and I got 30 grand back, and look at this amazing thing that they made. Like, and I was part of the adventure all along, and I got to see it in progress and show my kids and, whatever it is. Like, I think that's so cool. I don't know. That's like the best, in my opinion, that is the absolute best part of capitalism, right? Small scale, like indie capitalism. I love it to pieces. I think it's just so interesting and fun. I love that anybody can raise money, right? Like, it's not like I have a degree. I didn't do some like special process. The government didn't have to like authorize something for me. I filled out the right paperwork. That's it. And now you can raise money. But that is deeply uncomfortable to ask people that you know or people you don't know to invest in your thing, right? It requires a degree of self-belief and
belief in your product as well. Because
yeah,
I think if you were to actually, if you asked a lot of these indies, like, do you think these people that you're reaching out to would enjoy your game? A lot of them would say, yeah. So then it's a mental thing where you need to flip it. It's like, I'm not doing a gross thing just to help myself. Like, I genuinely think these other people would enjoy my game. So, yeah.
And I think the world of games is a beautiful thing, right? It's this, you're making a product that is, fundamentally relatively low energy cost. It is quite lightweight on the, environment and world around you. It's something that brings joy and relaxation and fun to people. I think that's wonderful. It's something that can bring people together and create fandoms and, build relationships. And like, me and my brother can sit on the couch and play together. I think there's a million wonderful things about gaming world. I love the creative, sort of passionate people who are involved in games world. I think employing those folks and giving them more opportunities, especially outside of the big studio crunch environments, that's a beautiful thing. Like, there's a lot of wonderful stuff here, right? It's not the drudgery of, hey, I'm going to employ, sort of low wage labor at a crappy job, doing a crappy thing for the world. This is not that. It's pretty much the inverse. So I think there's a lot to take pride in there. And I think fundraising is also a very good forcing function for an entrepreneur, which any game dev who's making something is an entrepreneur, right? Which is, you have to be able to justify why this game, why games at all, why this game now, for whom, how will you reach them, why will it resonate with them? And what are your sort of, how are you going to make the money back? And I think asking those questions is actually really great, because if you answer those correctly and effectively, you are giving your game a ton of marketing horsepower. Like, out of the gate, you have already designed something that you believe can be marketed in this way. And a whole bunch of other people have said, yeah, I think it can be marketed. I believe you. I think that this is going to work. If you get over those hurdles, I think you've already cleared a bar that, unfortunately, as you mentioned, right, many game devs don't.
Yeah, there's even that saying, isn't there? Like, never spend your own money. And which is, I think, less about, and some people adhere to that. I think it's less about not spending your money and more about, like, meeting that bar of, like, if this project is something that's worth investment from other people, then you're onto something.
Yeah, I like the expression, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Mm. And game dev, if you want to go far, go together. Like, even a small team, 3 people, with 10 investors who back you, one publisher who's behind you and their team. Like, I think that opportunity to go further, is there. I say publisher, even though I'm highly skeptical of most publishers. I was not impressed by the majority of publishers that I spoke to, and even less impressed by the stories I heard from other indie developers of their publisher experiences, which is why we did not go that path.
Right. So you're going full self-publish.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
How did those conversations go for you? Like, did you approach them in a way that's like, we've got this game that we've really wanted to make, and it's got elements of social change in it? Or did you approach those conversations like, I'm bringing my hyper-optimized Rand Fishkin marketing brain to identify holes in the gaming market, and here's where demand's not being met? That sounds like the latter. It sounds like
it was a little bit more of the latter. Yeah, if you want, I think I might have published one of the sample emails that I sent to people. But I can send you an example of that if that's interesting for your audience, or your folks. Essentially, the pitch that I eventually got to that was most successful, got me sort of the highest interest rate from folks that I dropped a line to, was around this. We're essentially playing Moneyball with the indie video games market. So our belief is that there's a massive number, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of games that are essentially 1 to 4 people, part-time teams, much less formal and less polished. They're often newer developers, or if they are, experienced developers, the project is less well-funded. It's usually done for less than $100,000 of cash expenditure. Those types of games, dozens of them are released on Steam every day, and plenty in the Nintendo Play Store. And they bias the indie dev market to think that the odds of making a hit game are low.
Okay.
As soon as you remove that group from the sort of world of indie games, and you take everything else that is made by a small studio that's not affiliated with a big company, or independent projects that have, let's say, $500,000 and up in cash funding, and release a relatively polished game, you're now talking about literally only a few hundred games that are released in a year, and a very high percent of those return single-digit millions in sales, like north of 40%. Which is crazy. It's absolutely wild. If you look at my old field, the tech startup field, my first company was a venture-backed tech startup. 95% of those companies don't make a dime, right? They're never able to even repay their initial investors. And then the next, 3 or 4% at the 95th to 97th percentile, they never clear the investor liquidation preferences. So, we're talking about a market where there's if your funding is relatively small, up to, $2 or $3 million in terms of cost of your total cost to put out your game, you have a much better shot than almost any field I've ever seen of making $2 to $3 million in game sales. Now, granted, there's lots of things, Steam's going to take a portion. You're going to have costs around it. You're going to have maintenance, all that kind of stuff. So you need a bit more of a hit than that, half of games. But it was quite an interesting market. And then the other thing that we did a very deep analysis on tags, genres.
There it is.
Yeah.
There's the Rand Fishkin.
You know me, right? So so me and some buddies did this giant crawl of the last about 14 years of game sales on Steam and Switch. And then we looked at tags and genres. We built a regression model that predicted game sales based on sort of all the inputs, right? Number of reviews was a big one, and what the reviews are for, and whether you got coverage in Metacritic, and blah, 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 blah. And all that stuff. If you take all of those, you build this regression model, and then you look at tags or genres that, when they are part of a game, the games with that tag or genre statistically outperform what the model suggests. Right. So cooking games was an example of this. There are not that many of them. If you remove the ones that sort of, are what I'd call, I don't know what to call the like tiny indies as opposed to sort of professionally produced or polished indies. But you remove the tiny indies, you look at the polished indies, you look at the, 50 or 60 games that have been produced in the last decade with that tag or genre. They seriously outperform what the stats of the model says they're going to do. Right. So the model might say, hey, we think this game's going to do $1 million. It does 3, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So cooking was something that we quickly latched onto, and the fact that it dovetailed really nicely with Geraldine's work, and her audience just made that a perfect match. The other thing was there's a bunch that do terribly, right? There's like a bunch where they underperform. I think because people make so many of them. Platformers, Metroidvanias. Oh my God, this is such an insanely hard market. I think because a lot of people make them. But the other one, story rich genre. If you get over that, into the polished indie, that was another one. And so we latched on that too.
It's an interesting distinction, the polished indie versus the sort of smaller budget indie, because it's something that I wanted to get into. I mean, when you look at just the amount of Steam releases over the last, I guess, 10 years or so, like if you go back to 2015, we're talking about something like 2,000 Steam releases in a year. Mm-hmm. And in recent years, we're talking more like 22K Steam releases in a year. And, Valve have somewhat tried to address that problem by attaching a monetary, like a fee to release a game on Steam. And they've also tried to implement curation algorithms. But what we're essentially talking about, like when you talk about like, if you eliminate the lower budget indie games and consider the sort of triple I's, if you will, then you're essentially backing yourself. You're saying like, I can be one of these. And when you're doing that, then it becomes a problem of search and curation, because you're essentially saying I can rise above the noise. Because, one thing that's become clear in the last, I guess, 5 to 10 years is that the best game doesn't always win.
I'm going to take mild issue with that. I would agree that the best, my favorite game didn't have the most sales.
Sure.
I think that's a fair assessment for any thing. But if you were to take a look at games versus any other creative endeavor, I would argue that over the last decade, the best 1,000 games are also in the top 3,000 or 4,000 best performing games from a sales perspective. That would be my argument. And I think that is not true in music. I don't think it's true in plays and musicals. I don't think it's true in books. I don't think it's true in television shows. I don't think it's true in movies. Like, you name a creative artistic endeavor where, I don't know, sculpture, right? Where the best stuff, in games, that would be like the most fun, most addictive, most enjoyable, sort of most polished, best designed. Games is one of the rare spaces where it may not be 1-to-1. It's not perfect, but compared to every other artistic pursuit, it is miles above. It is so much more fair of a playing field than any of these other ones. You and I, Jeremy, could write a great play, and as much as I'd love it, it would probably
let's do it.
Yeah, right. Like, Broadway is not going to say yes. It doesn't. We could have the best play of the last 100 years. And just getting that barrier to entry of how do we get it performed, forget about it,
Yeah.
So when we did this analysis, I just looked at the numbers. I have a sort of web version of this thing. It was 11,000 games since 2007. So 10,968 games that had, I believe our bar was you had to have 250 reviews or more on Steam and or Switch. And that number is tiny. Like, that's less than 1,000 games a year, to your point, right? So.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree that, like, probably more so than other mediums, like, the best games rise to the top, but I think it can be a little bit genre specific. Like, there are some genres that for example, games journalists deal with less. And then there are some technical issues that other mediums don't have, such as, when we're talking about multiplayer PvP games, there needs to be it needs to meet a certain threshold of a player base. Otherwise it's complete death, right? If you don't meet that bar, then the game goes away. And, there's always exceptions. I can think of a game called Battle Right, which I used to love. And when I was a critic, I gave it full marks, but it just didn't get much of a community. And as a result, not a lot of people knew about it. And then, when it comes to the Game Awards, this is voted on by a lot of industry people, and
right.
It becomes more of a popularity contest where it's like the award is more like, this is what people played, as opposed to, this was the best game. But I do definitely take your point. But I guess when we're talking about you are backing yourself to sort of shout above the crowd, so to speak. And this is kind of like a search problem, isn't it? This is not specifically Google search, although Google search can be involved. But does that mean you would dive into the world of Steam SEO and App Store SEO and Switch
Absolutely.
SEO and stuff like that?
Yes. Yeah. I think, two things matter tremendously for us. So one is playing the algorithm, and the other is the branding overall, right? So for the sort of 12 months prior to the game's early access release, huge amount of importance placed around getting the game's visuals and short videos and, sort of polished little, whatever, boss fights or cooking adventures or whatever it is, into the collective consciousness of people who are likely to be early adopters of new games on Steam being the first place that we're going to be going, and also getting as much media attention as we can, right? Doing interesting and weird things. One of the things, for example, we've talked about, I'm not sure if this will end up being the case, but we have talked about using a food truck to open a snack bar at the end of the world, that people can actually go visit at some of the big industry conferences. And then you can get the dishes that are featured in the video game.
Oh man.
That
sounds great. And if you were offering good food at a convention where their only other option is convention food, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, right. And it's one of these fun tie-in concepts. There's lots of other stuff, right? We have a connection through a friend to Stanley Tucci, who obviously runs this, very popular Italian travel and food and cooking show. And we were like, well, we could potentially get him to do the narration. Do we think that's worthwhile? That kind of stuff. And does that generate lots of media buzz and attention that will get it in front of a different audience and build these kinds of things? Other stuff around specifically Steam. So I've been studying that for years now, listening to tons of, podcasts and videos and people walking through how the algorithm works, talking to some folks at Valve, because they're actually pretty open about it. They don't try and hide what's going on there, right? But one of the big things is that initial buzz, like day one, even the first few hours matters a whole bunch. When people buy the game, do they actually play it? When they play it, do they review it? What do those reviews, those very early reviews say? It blows my mind, Jeremy. I'm going to say this. It blows my mind that you could release a game and not have 250 people's email that you would email on the day of release personally and be like, Jeremy, our game came out today. I really enjoyed being on your podcast. Is there any chance, I could get you to, buy the game, try it out and leave a review. And, next time I see you, drinks are on me, right? Whatever it is. I'm not saying pay people to go leave reviews. That's obviously against the TOS. But how do you not have 250 people in your universe who already know that they want to play your game? It blows my mind. I mean, the number of games with not even 100 reviews blows my mind. And so, this is, I think we have about 800 people on our Rand will email them, the week before it comes out and get them on there. And I hope to have thousands more by the time we get to launch. because those early reviews mean everything. Early sales, that's how Steam determines whether they're going to feature your game more in the, new and upcoming, whether they're going to put it in people's daily, where they show you a bunch of games that are in your feed essentially.
But I'm glad that your head's been in this space so much, because I did want to ask you about that. I know you've got a hard stop.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to run in a minute. But yeah, tell me, last question. Let's do it.
What would you say to game developers who are trying to cut above the noise? Who they see all these low budget indie games being released on Steam, 22,000 a year. They know they are making a good game. They know people would enjoy playing it. How do they cut above the noise?
First off, during development, please use QA. So it's okay to use some amateur QA, like your friends and family and whatever, but also if you can afford even a few $1,000s of professional QA time, that makes a huge difference. If you can get to the point where you have some tracking and you see that your paid QAs are playing your game, even when they're not being paid to do it, that is a fantastic sign that the game is going to do well. And if that's not true, I might keep iterating until you get there. This is one of Nico, our game designer's biggest things. He's like, if we give the game away, for free in the test period and people come back to it without being told, we know we're onto something like that. It's going to be a hit. The second thing I would do is say, make sure you know your audience's sources of influence. What are the 25 YouTube channels that have covered the 6 games that are closest to your game? What made those things resonate? Watch those videos. Why did those YouTubers cover those? What did they write about? Go through the reviews for every one of those games that are very similar to yours. Look for the negative reviews. What did people not like? Look for the positive reviews. What are things that people did? You can download those, throw them into ChatGPT, and for 1/100th of a penny, you can have ChatGPT analyze the words and phrases that appear most and tell you, hey, these are the things that people commented on positively the most about these games. These are the ones they commented on negatively. I love this analysis process to set yourself up for success instead of just going, oh, my game's really fun.
Yeah.
You can't trust yourself. I don't trust myself. I don't, you gotta get this out there. Jeremy, what a pleasure it has been to join you for this conversation. I truly appreciate you having me on. I apologize I have to run early, but let's do this again sometime soon.
Hey, I'd love to. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing so much. Hey, both in the SEO space and the gaming space, because I used to watch Whiteboard Friday years and years ago. You taught me about SEO, and I was paying the bills for a while doing that. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.